Hebräisch, Russisch gar nicht, Ladino, Englisch gar nicht, Esperanto über alles, gar nicht, gar nicht, gar nicht, Esperanto über alles, gar nicht, gar nicht, gar nicht, Israel nothing, Palestine nothing, Theodore Herzl nothing, Yitzhak Rabin nothing, Hamas, Fatah, Hezbollah nothing, 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 Hamas, Fatah, Hezbollah nothing, 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 Torah nothing, Talmud nothing, Quran and Bible nothing, the Wailing Wall is nothing, if they build a new fucking temple, nothing, 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 if the Jews build a new fucking temple, nothing, 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 Muhammad nothing, Mashiach nothing, Barack Obama nothing, Netanyahu nothing, Arafat and Arik Sharon, Nachman nothing, Jesus Christ and Allen Ginsberg, Nachman nothing, Holocaust nothing, Auschwitz nothing, Deir Yassin is nothing, Shab Rosh Hashanah nothing, Yom HaTzmaut and Yad Vashem, Nakba nothing, Yom HaTzmaut and Yad Vashem, nothing, Nakba nothing, the boycott is nothing, a birthright is nothing, the IDF is nothing, PLO is nothing, Gilad Shalit and Rachel Corrie, nothing, 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 Gilad Shalit and Rachel Corrie, nothing, nothing, kill me! Cynicism, nothing, nihilism, nothing, hipster humor, nothing, postmodern bullshit, nothing, foreign assholes with opinions, nothing, 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 stupid songs that just provoke you, garnish, garnish, garnish.
Yiddish epis, Arabisch epis, Hebräisch und Russisch epis, Ladino und Englisch epis, Esperanto noch an epis, 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 epis. Israel something, Palestine something, Theodore Herzl something, Yitzhak Rabin something, someone, Hamas and Fatah, Hezbollah something, 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 Torah something, Talmud something, Quran and Bible something, the Wailing Wall is something, if they build a new third temple, something, 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 Muhammad someone, Mashiach someone, Barack Obama someone, Netanyahu someone, Arafat and Arik Sharon, Nachman someone, Jesus Christ and Allen Ginsberg, Nachman something, Holocaust something, Auschwitz something, Deir Yassin is something, Sabra Shatila something, Yom HaTzmaut, Yad Vashem, Nakba something, Yom HaTzmaut and Yad Vashem, Nakba something. The boycott is something, birthright is something, IDF is something, PLO is something, Gilad Shalit, Rachel Corrie, someone, Gilad Shalit, Rachel Corrie, both of them are someone. Cynicism is a very important part of the discourse. Right now, when I talk to people in this country, when I ask them what they think about the politics, they say that everything is going to end, which is exactly what the evangelicals want to happen. Apocalypse something. Irony something. Stupid songs that try to make it better. Something, something, something.
Oh, our revered and beloved ancestors, we welcome you into our hearts. Oh, our revered and beloved ancestors, we welcome you into this space. We welcome you to sit with us in the shade and the shadow. Oh, the mothers of our souls and of our blood, be with us so that we may bring your merits into our lives. Amen. That was adapted from a few different rituals traditionally performed by Ashkenazi women in the Pale of Settlement in Eastern Europe. One of the rituals is for the recently passed holiday of Sukkot, where we honor our ancestors by inviting them to dine with us. And in recent years, many feminist and queer groups have expanded that to include the mothers of our soul, our chosen ancestors, the people who, just like our blood ancestors, have helped to build the world in which we live and build the people that we are. Another ritual that we used is the ritual of measuring graves. A woman's ritual to honor the ancestor included using string to measure the grave sites of your most beloved ancestors. You would then take the string and use it as wicks to make candles that you would light in your home to welcome the ancestors there. Earlier today, I don't have many ancestors buried in this country, and most of them are really hard to get to on TTC. So instead, I went down to Spadina and Dundas and measured the main doors of the building that used to be the Victory Yiddish Burlesque Theater, which is now a drugstore on that corner. But I thought that was the closest I could get to honored ancestors as a performer here. Just so you know, you probably gathered this already. I'm not an academic. I've never given a keynote speech in my life. And I was a relatively recent addition to this lineup. I think I contacted the organizers about it, and I don't know if this has happened to you if you're part of a marginalized or minority group before, but when you contact them and say, for example, hey, is there any Jewish content? And then 10 minutes later, you are the Jewish content. That sometimes happens. Anyway, my name is Emily, but I perform under the name Goldie Luxemburg. Yes, my stage name is actually more Jewish than my legal name. That doesn't happen very often. Yes, I am a burlesque and cabaret performer, mostly living in Hamilton, but traveling when I can. I'm also a community worker, and I mostly work in the field of food access, and I manage community kitchen projects. So this is certainly not my first time talking to a group of people while I'm front and center. However, usually when I'm doing that, I am really scantily clad and cracking dirty jokes, or I'm directing everybody and making a delicious meal for us to share. So there's going to be elements of both of those formats here, and honestly, if we combined them, that would be like the perfect way for me to tell these stories. So I want you to kind of keep in the back of your mind that the ideal setting for this talk would be all of us in our cutest pajamas making a delicious meal together. Take note of this for future conferences. I think that would really rock. So she has notes. Yeah. So I want to start my talk on women's language, women's spirituality, and how that affected femme performance in Jewish drag queens and cabaret artists, which then went on and affected everybody else because we're powerful like that. But I want to just make sure that we have some terms down. Sometimes I come into fairly Christian spaces and things that I take for granted that people would know, they don't. So if you're like, dude, I already know this, that's awesome. But I just want to go over it just in case. So I'm mostly going to talk about Jews who are from Europe, and more particularly from Eastern Europe. That tribe is called Ashkenazi, or Ashkenazim in plural. In general, there's totally a thing where that is everybody's stereotypical idea of the Jew. It's the person from Poland or Russia and so on and so forth. That is by no means the only or even oldest population. As we fled from Israel after the Roman takeover and so on and so forth, people went to Spain and Morocco and formed their own group. Different groups went to Iraq and India, and there are multiple ethnic and linguistic and custom groups there. There are groups for Syria, there are groups in Yemen, there are groups in Ethiopia and Eritrea. There are groups that went straight to Greece from Israel almost 2,000 years ago. These are all amazing stories, and there are many similarities in culture, but I just want to make it clear that I'm talking specifically about the one that I come from, right? All of these groups also had different languages. The Bukharian Jews of Iraq have their own language that evolved there. There's Ladino for the Sephardi Jews, which incorporates some medieval Spanish and Portuguese. People in Yemen and Eritrea often speak a Neo-Aramaic, and the language in Ashkenazi culture is Yiddish. People often think of Yiddish as just a variant of German, but it's kind of like you take some Hebrew and you take some medieval German, and then as my ancestors are displaced throughout Middle and Eastern Europe, it rolls around and collects words and phrases and rules of grammar like Katamari Damacy, like sucking everything up. So it's a little more complicated than that. And then the last thing I want to be clear about is that I come from very particularly the Ashkenazi groups that lived in the Pale of Settlement, which, or the Russian Pale, which was a mostly rural area that includes bits of what is today like Russia, Poland, Ukraine, Latvia, Belarus, lots of other things. And, depending on who was in charge and how far the Russian Empire stretched on any given decade, you were never quite sure who was the actual legal rulers, who was about to come and kick you out of your home to make you move to somewhere else where maybe you had a different language. Then there are different customs and languages throughout the Pale of Settlement. The small villages who were in the Pale of Settlement were called shtetls. And that was generally very small. Jews were not allowed to own land and could be, again, displaced at any time. So any farming was extremely subsistence-based. Any business was quite small. It was pretty rural without being agricultural in any way. And you've probably seen an image of a shtetl if you've seen a film like Fiddler on the Roof. That takes place in a shtetl. If you've seen the excellent cartoon film An American Tail, the first scenes where they're having the holiday as a family, that takes place in a shtetl, and so on. Between the years, let's say, 1880 and 1920, there was a continuing and escalating series of pogroms in the shtetl. Now, pogrom was essentially a state-sanctioned massacre, sometimes committed by soldiers of whichever country you were legally in, sometimes committed by het-up Christian civilians, and they were destruction and murder and sexual assault, and often a great deal of displacement after those. But in 1880, until the early 1920s, this group was actually legally allowed to migrate to the Americas. So that's when you start getting that particular Jewish culture there. Now, that's just a very small amount of background, and you might still have questions of me, of the things that I talk about after this. So, in the interest of moving on with the story, I just want to let you know that I will be available for the rest of the conference if you want to flag me down, and I am happy to play a game of Ask a Jew with you. I would like to explain the rules just so you're clear. This is how you play Ask a Jew. You show me your phone, which has evidence that you have donated an amount, however small, to a reputable Palestinian aid agency, and in exchange, I will answer whatever question you have about Jewish culture and history to the best of my abilities, taking into account that I am only one person with one point of view, and also that I will answer the question with the same degree of respect and politeness to which it is asked. All right, we good? So yeah, I'm actually serious about that. Flag me down. I'm happy to play that game. So we're going to start in places like New York City, in Chicago, in Montreal, where people start to settle. But first, I gotta tell you the main point of this damn talk. So in the shtetl, in Ashkenazi culture, there was, as in most cultures, division of labor between people who are men, people who are women. However, this division of labor looked very, very different than the surrounding Christian communities in Europe. In those communities, a lot of the time, the men's job was to be in public, to be the leader, to do things outside of the house, right? Women are supposed to be the angel in the house, certainly in the 19th century. And they're supposed to be quieter and domestic and concerned with those things. However, Ashkenazi culture was different. The most masculine man in that culture was the one who was the most learned, who was studied, who people wanted to listen to. If you think like the rabbis, their students, their adult students even, that was there. I mean, if you had a man who was making a living through manual labor or maybe even skilled trades like a tailor or something, that was great. But it was probably because he wasn't that good at books. And having a husband who was a good earner was good. But was it as good as having a husband who was a learner and therefore holy and virtuous? Maybe not so much. And contrary-wise, a lot of the role of women was to take place in public. Because another thing that you could tell, if a man was earning a living by trade, it was probably because his wife wasn't any good at running a business. Because that was part of women's work. It was to run the business. It was to provide for the family. It was to perform the public acts, right? And it also included things like dealing with the secular and Christian authorities. So in that culture, especially as the 19th century goes on, women are more likely to speak the local language. Women are more likely to get a secular education. Now, don't get me wrong, it is still a patriarchy. There are all kinds of things going on, but the division of labor is different. So then, once people start emigrating to the United States, Canada, Central and South America, we're suddenly living among other people instead of in our shtetls and ghettos. And we really see the difference in this culture. And oh boy, do the outsiders really see the difference. We start to get certain stereotypes in popular culture, right? We get the ghetto girl. She's loud, she's flashy, she's bossy, she's bitchy. Which in her culture is just being feminine, right? We also get a couple of dueling stereotypes about men. We certainly get the nice Jewish boy who just wants to study. He just wants to be left alone with his book. He's going to start a family and his wife is going to talk for him. But as you can imagine, a lot of guys get to the new world and like, no. You start to get a few different competing other stereotypes. You get the chic of Avenue B, as the song went it. The guy whose exotic good looks and ways with women are going to lure the Christian girls out of their families. You also get the gangster, because of course, if you're a brand new, extremely poor urban refugee population, organized crime is a way to make a living. And a lot of the early Jewish gangsters get reputations for being viciously violent. So we have all these different images coming up. And all of this is happening in North America when new technology is coming on and new job opportunities. This is the birth of recorded sound. This is the birth of massive theaters in city populations that are affordable to everybody, right? This is the birth of the first films. And so, of course, a new refugee population is going to be looking to move into these fields where there's no one already at the top holding them down, right? You also have Yiddish theater. Like I said, we had one just down the street from here. And in Yiddish theater, there are certain conventions. The oldest actors usually are playing the teenagers. The apprentice actors are cast as the grandparents, the altercockers, the old farts in the comedies. And sometimes there's a little bit of gender play, as in, say, an English pantomime kind of thing. But because all of these different people are living so closely together, eventually the Yiddish theater starts to blend into what's the mainstream. And they bring their jokes, and they bring their persona, they bring their archetypes. There's one early song that was written by Irving Berlin, but it kind of sounds like Irving Berlin maybe wrote it on a Friday afternoon when he wanted to get home pretty soon. And that it was written for a woman to sing. And it was about the way that theater was changing, and about the way that Jewish life was changing, and about the way that men and women were reacting to this change. My friend Asher Ettinger gave me, lent me his piano talents. So hit it, Sean. Sadie Cohen left her happy home to become an actress lady. On the stage, she soon was all the rage as the only real Salome baby. When he came to town, her sweetheart Mose bought for her around a pretty rose. But he got an awful fright when his Sadie came in sight. Mose stood up and yelled with all his might, "Don't do that dance, I tell you, Sadie. That's not no business for a lady. Most everybody knows that I'm your lovin' Mose. Oi, 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 get out your clothes. You better go and get your dresses. Everyone's got them opera glasses. Oh, what a big disgrace. No one looks at your face. Sadie, so long, go home." From the crowd, young Moses cried out loud, "What put in your head such notions? You danced so sweet when you wiggled with your feet. Who thought you're behind such funny motions? As a singer, you was always fine. Sing to me, because the world is mine." Then the crowd began to roar. Sadie did her big encore. Mo stood up and yelled to her once more, "Don't do that dance, I tell you, Sadie. That's not our business for a lady. Most everybody knows that I'm your lovin' Mose. Oi, 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 that is your clothes. You better go and get your dresses. Everyone's got them opera glasses. Oh, what a big disgrace. No one looks at your face. Sadie, so long, go home." Cut it, Sean. So that one was originally sung in the Follies by a young Fanny Bryce, who was in fact herself born in the United States, but she kind of adopted the accent and persona of a greenhorn, someone who's come from the old world and still doesn't know the new ways about it. And there were many other performers who played with this image and this archetype of the loud, sexually aggressive, flashy, commanding, I love it, Jewish woman. Another one was Sophie Tucker, who was a little bit older, a little bit more zaftig, as they say, and would sing gorgeously raunchy songs about her young lovers and how they couldn't get enough of her. Another was Jean Malin, or rather Eugene Malinowski of Brooklyn. And a word on names. I am not in favor of dead naming trans performers unless at some point in their life they said it was okay for people to do that when they're talking about them. However, I am kind of in favor of giving you the Jewish names of performers who changed it to appear less Jewish, because that is a way of making our history visible. In a way, imagine if every trans performer passed as cis, and you would not have any record of who they were and that they were a person who was one of our chosen ancestors, right? So that's why I'm going to do that. So Gene Malin, who was born Eugene Malinowski in Brooklyn, started out as a chorus boy. He was tall, he was blonde, he was buff, he was built, and he looked fantastic in a wig and dress. He became one of the most well-known and highest paid drag performers of the 1920s. In addition, he would often MC other drag shows in his full tux and his marcelled hair. This was the time of the pansy craze in New York City, which was basically a trend of going to see drag shows. Not, civil rights or anything, but a trend of straight people going to see drag shows. And Malin was the hit. He was especially known as a fierce defender of himself and his fellow performers. There are stories of him, whether he was dressed in a tux or an evening gown, beating the hell out of people who threatened to bash or even insult drag performers. He was so popular, he ended up moving to LA, was in three movies, two of which had Joan Crawford in them, and it looked like he was going to be huge. Unfortunately, when he was riding in a car with two other queer performers, there was a crash. The other two made it out. Gene Malin didn't. He was about 26 years old only. 2 out of the 3 movies he had just filmed, his part was cut from, because this is the early 30s. The Hays Code is coming in Hollywood, and we're not going to show anything that is overtly queer in any way. In fact, the pansy craze is totally over. In fact, the brash broads of the Follies are becoming a bit passé. The Great Depression is in full force, and during troubled times, a lot of people want to lean into old-fashioned values, right? The way they were. It's comforting for some people. It's erasure for everyone else. But yeah, times were very troubled, and times were about to get even more troubled. Back in Europe, there was a genocide. And one of the things that happened in the Holocaust, I'm going to be skipping through a lot of really bad traumatic stuff in this because I'm doing the 20th century, hey? And also, this bad traumatic stuff is stuff that we all know about, and this talk is a little bit more of how we survive and move it on, or how we failed to, right? So one of the things that is not talked about a lot is that happens in the Holocaust, is that the Pale of Settlement is entirely wiped out. These, if they're kind of closer to Germany, everyone is killed. If they're closer to Russia, they kind of get absorbed into the USSR's new official atheism, where it's okay to be ethnically Jewish, but it's not okay to be religiously Jewish. And also, we're going to relocate you all around the country, and you'd better stop having your holidays, that kind of thing. So there's basically no homeland to go back to for the Ashkenazis at this point. And after the Second World War, people are still getting really, really, really into these traditional roles of everybody, aren't they? So this is the chapter I like to call the fucking 50s. And is it drag or is it disguise? Because let's face it, sometimes these overlap, but these are different concepts when you think about how it makes us feel. So in popular culture in the 50s, queers basically disappear. There is not the, like in really accessible popular culture, you no longer have like the little illusions that you would have in earlier screwball comedies and so on. And for people who are Jewish, the message that they get in the Americas is that you are welcome and safe here as long as you are no different than everybody else, right? And drag is kind of confined to the beautiful, elegant, but definitely marginalized female impersonator circuit, where it's kind of treated like a zoo, right? Also at the same time, there's, and sorry if this is a little bit America-centric, this is where I come from again, there's the House Un-American Activities Committee, where the American government is going to root out communists from popular culture and civil service. Now, people have, many books have been written about the way that this was also definitely a way to root out gay people from these jobs. They called it the Lavender Menace. If communists are out to get us, well, any queer person in public service is open to blackmail. So clearly, the communists are going to go after them. What is talked about less is that this was also a way of targeting Jews in these periods, and that was who were overwhelmingly called then. And oh my God, the idea of a queer commie kike was so powerful, disturbing, disgusting. It almost feels like people coming out of that, like Allen Ginsberg, had like superpowers or something like that. So a lot of people are going into hiding in one way or another, right? They're going into disguise, and there are ways to get around that. In 1920, in the early 20s, a girl was born in New York City who was called Judy Telev. I think I said that right. And when she Judith Telev, and when she comes into becoming an actress, she literally translates her name to Judy Holliday. Judy Holliday was known for her portrayal of buxom, blonde bimbos who were good-hearted no matter what, and who were very, very white, right? Judy Holliday was called in front of the McCarthy hearings because, frankly, she was a giant pinko in a lavender marriage. But she did what she did best when she was sitting in front of that committee. She did her job. She did the job that had won her an Oscar. She played dumb. She giggled. She pretended to misunderstand everything. She flirted with them. And when she left, she said to a friend, "Everyone may think I'm stupid, but I didn't name names." And that's one way to do it, right? It makes me think a lot of, to step out of the historic timeline for a moment, it makes me think a lot of two memes that are going around now. And one of us is, of course, what's her name? Jules LeBron and her demure thing, where the trans feminine influencer is talking about how to look demure and appropriate at work. And then the other one, of course, with the 90s sitcom character Fran Fine saying, "I'm going to try to be a little bit more demure." And it gets big laughs, of course. But if you think about it, we're talking about one trans woman and one obviously ethnically Jewish woman who are trying to make their way through life without having had the girlhood training in how to be submissive and pretty and quiet, right? So learning how to be demure as an adult, is a drag or is it a life-saving disguise, right? I mean, there's another way to get away with this kind of thing. And I'd like to talk about another performer. What was her? I think Eileen, this is a performer who was really famous in the 50s, and you might not have heard of her, but she was Rusty Warren. She was a Jewish girl, brought up, she was brilliant at piano, a really good singer, she could make people laugh, and so she built a career as a famous comedian and comic song cabaret performer. And her character was the white, suburban, horny housewife. And this was her signature song that she would sing to rooms full of drunk middle-class couples. Can I get it? Rusty Warren?
Knockers up! Knockers up! Knockers up! Ladies, get your knockers up! Hey-ho! Hey-ho! Come on there, girls! Roll those shoulders back and get your knockers up! Put a big smile on the world today! Come on there! Come on, your lady dance! Get those shoulders back! Get those knockers up! There we go! Now doesn't that make your navel tingle?
That's enough of that. Thank you. Rusty Warren was as queer as a $3 bill. She lived an openly lesbian life, even as early as the 50s. And in an interview that she gave with the New York Times that they published in her obituary, yes, she was big enough to get into that People Who Died magazine that they do every year. She said, yeah, I was a lesbian, but professionally, I was a heterosexual. So I see the Rusty Warren character as hiding in plain sight, because that's a drag queen, you know? I'm going to take a sip of water. I'm going to hit the 60s really hard. Oh, no, wait. We've got something better happening. Meanwhile, in Israel. So, in the colonial project of Israel, which a lot of Jewish people have their hopes pinned on. Now, to be clear, Zionism as an actual political movement where we think we're actually physically going to move to Israel in our lifetimes is only about 200 years old. It gets started up in England and France in the 19th century, around the time when Jews in those countries get citizenship rights and can have businesses and start lobbying for various causes. Not too much younger is the counter movement, the diasporous movement, which takes the message of we will only be safe if we have our own country and puts it through an anarcho-communist blender and says, no, we need to make sure that every country we live in is safe. And this is a very popular movement. It's very popular in the parts of the Pale that get wiped out, but it remained popular in North America and Canada, and we have diasporist organizations even now. And an Ask a Jude question would be, I will show you all of them, okay? But the movement is going on in Israel. And a lot of world governments are promoting it. Now, whether this is because they kind of feel a little bit guilty about the bit where we didn't stop the whole genocide thing happening or let your refugees into our countries, it might be, as many British politicians put it when they were ceding this territory that they totally had a right to give over to a Jewish government, that they wanted to get rid of the Jews in their country. And they thought, oh, this is a nice, humane way to do it. We'll just ship them off somewhere else, right? And a lot of the people who are arriving there are super, super, super fucking traumatized, right? They've just been maybe the sole survivor of their family from a genocide. And guess what? Trauma does not always lead people to making generous, good choices with the way they treat other people. It's one of the reasons trauma is very bad, by the way. And the government of Israel is making some decisions. They want to decide what language they're going to have. And they're like, well, it can't be Yiddish, even though we're totally going to prioritize socially the European Jews. It can't be Yiddish because that was the language of when we were weak, of when we were oppressed, of when we let the women do all the talking, right? So they decide that they're going to make modern Hebrew the language, and in fact, suppress the language of Yiddish and make it very, very hard for everyone but a few small poetry publications to print Yiddish, and they ban Yiddish theater. So with the banning of Yiddish, you get the suppression of women's spirituality, because women's spirituality has always been in the day-to-day language. Men's spirituality has always been in Hebrew, and that's the language that we're all going to speak now, right? In addition, the government decides that instead of an egalitarian, socialist, atheist government that a lot of the settlers were looking forward to, they're going to institute religious law and make it the law of the land, especially with regards to marriage, divorce, and child custody. So you have the really, really awesome and healthy environment of a massively traumatized population doubling down on patriarchy and all that that brings. In the Americas, something a little similar is going on. There are a lot of books being written by Jewish writers, people who are second and third generation, a lot of very important books that you're going to have to study in university. A lot of them are really, really nasty about Jewish women. The overbearing mother who made me such a mess. The ugly, sexually aggressive bitch I don't want to marry. I'm not going to name any names of books, but you know who I'm talking about. Philip Roth, Woody Allen, Lenny Bruce. I love Lenny Bruce. But one of his lines when Elizabeth Taylor converted to Judaism is like, well, I don't want her anymore because now I know she's got a mustache. I can't see it, but I know it's there. So yeah, we're getting that as well. Patriarchy looks really good. In 1960, Susan Sontag publishes her seminal, insert dick joke here, essay, Notes on Camp. And this is the first really popular academic look at drag culture. It is actually written as notes. Did you know that? It's like 60-something, 58 point form notes in this essay. Sontag gets to point 50 and 51 before she writes the words homosexual or Jew, despite being both herself. But she does make a point, kind of leading people into the argument of how interesting is camp. Is camp bad taste? Is it, in fact, better taste? And I'm going to read from point 51 for you when she brings this up. She's talking about how, is it weird that I compare Jews to homosexuals? And she's like, no. The analogy is not frivolously chosen. Jews and homosexuals are the outstanding creative minorities in contemporary culture. Creative, that is, in the truest sense. They are creators of sensibilities, the two pioneering forces of modern sensibility. And basically her argument is that if you're standing slightly outside of culture, you have this marvelously skewed perspective to mirror it back in a warped and wonderful way, right? Another excellent relic from the 60s is the 1968 documentary, The Queen. Have you guys seen it? So it's a drag queen beauty pageant in 1968. And again, this is something that people have not seen. This is going to blow people's minds at the film festival, of course. One of the main characters in it is the producer and MC who goes by the name Flawless Sabrina. Sabrina was a nice Jewish boy from Philadelphia who gets really into the drag scene there when he's in college. And there aren't enough drag shows. So, of course, they're like, I got to start putting them on. He's going to be the producer. And he wants to make it clear that even though knockout, Sabrina is not competing. Sabrina is not going to be putting people down. Sabrina is going to be taking care of and mentoring the younger contestants. And that's when Flawless Sabrina introduces a term that she's mother, because she is the nurturer of everyone. This movie also has a marvelously famous final 3 minutes in which the winner of the pageant ends up being, of course, the youngest, blondest, cutest, whitest. And fantastic drag queen Crystal LaBeija of New York goes off on the contestants, goes off on the host, goes off on the producers, and in fact walks away and off screen later founds the House of LaBeija in Manhattan, starting up that ballroom scene. So you got to watch this movie, is what I'm saying. And yeah, maybe Sabrina was not correct in the way that she treated Crystal, but you know what? You can love your mother and still know that sometimes she's wrong, right? In the movie, they also have the characters just start to talk about the bathhouse scene in New York. And so I'm not going to talk necessarily about what's going on in the nooks and crannies of the bathhouse scene. There's an amazing movie called The Conditional, which, full disclosure, a friend of mine made. That has a great documentary about it. I want to talk about what's going on stage, because as the 70s go on. There's almost like a second pansy craze. And people from all over are like, I want to go see the floor show at the Baths. And so many Jewish performers are there. There is Barry Manilow on the piano. The main star of things is Bette Midler. And Bette Midler is bringing back routines and songs that people like Fanny Brice and Sophie Tucker and Jean Mallon used to do back in the day. One of her backup singers is Ellen Green, who later goes on and does Little Shop of Horrors. And Audrey, and Ellen as Audrey is yet another like Jewish girl playing a blonde as drag, right? And also in New York City, a young Jewish drag performer, Harvey Fierstein, produces the first of his plays that are later called the Torch Song Trilogy, in which he plays young Jewish drag performer in New York, but one who dares to imagine a world that is possible, who speaks into being a world that is possible, where his character demands both sex and love, where his character demands a family of friends and a family of blood, where this character demands both authenticity and respect from anyone who he allows into his life, including his own mother. And then the 70s end, and then there's another horrible plague on everybody, and the pansy craze is really fucking over at that point. Does anyone here old enough to remember TV in the early 80s? Because there's kind of like the gay guy in the corner, and there's definitely the Jap stereotype. If you're too young for the Jewish American princess. Once again, she's loud, she's bossy, she's bitchy, her clothes are too tight, her hair is too big. And then there's the gay guy in the corner who maybe gets a little offline here and there. They're definitely marginalized, they're definitely mocked, and definitely no man with any status wants to fuck either of them. I mean, that's not actually what happened, but anyway. Is there anything else I got? No. You know what happens into this environment? I get born. I'm around. This is my background as far as I know. I get born in Toronto to a mixed family. My mother is a Reform convert of Anglo-colonial ancestry. My father comes from this really excellent, big New York Jewish socialist, feminist, mouthy family. My friends have so many my parents have so many queer and trans friends in the 80s. I really thought that going to funerals is just what moms did on the weekend, right? My parents are losing their friends. But I live in Parkdale. I have queer neighbors. I have trans neighbors. They're just part of my environment, right? And while there may not be queer, Jewish, and definitely not queer and Jewish characters on mainstream cable TV, this is Toronto. We've got TVO. We've got TBS coming up from Buffalo. And we've got City TV where they'll put fucking anything on late at night, right? So I get to see these movies. I get to see the movies from the 30s. I get to see the movies from the 70s. I get to see the sitcoms in the 70s where there were gay characters. I get to see the movies where there was a person who was speaking Yiddish, right? And this is all just part of my life. I get to graduate into adulthood to an amazing theater community that starts taking me to drag shows as the kid sister when I'm 15, that start casting me in shows that my parents know about, and they think that's the best way our teenage daughter can be spending her late night time, right? And we start to take this for granted again. I become a mother myself. Try to bring my kid up to know that they can be anything they want. When I start talking to him about gender and I ask if he can describe, I describe my gender to him. And I'm like, well, I'm definitely a girl, but I'm also kind of like a girly girl, but I'm also very bossy. So my gender is bossy princess. And my 3-year-old son looks back at me and he's like, well, I'm definitely a boy, but I'm a boy who sometimes likes to dress up and is very good at taking care of people. And I'm like, legit, cool. We got that down. There's a poll about 10 years ago that comes out that in urban environments, the number of people aged 14 to 25 that now identify as not straight is not the Kinsey 1 in 10. It's 1 in 6. I don't know if I've mentioned this before. I know. Running out of time. But that's cool. We're also running out of history. So we're good. In troubled times, people really like to reach back into these traditional values, traditional gender roles. People like to enforce them. And one of the reasons that I reach for these rituals after Yiddish had been suppressed in Israel, wiped out in Europe, and assimilated out of North American culture, is that these women's rituals in Yiddish are ones that are participatory. They're ones that are public. And they're not about picking out the tiny minutia of Jewish law, which are great. If that's your scene, I love lady rabbis, that's cool. But they're about building the world to come, as we say. How do we build the world that we want? When I was a student here at U of T 20 years ago, I got the opportunity to do a Q&A with the playwright Thompson Highway when we started nerding out about Broadway musicals. And I was like, why are mid-century Broadway musicals so misogynistic? Why are they? And he's, brilliant, and I'm going to misquote or semi-quote him as best I can with 20 years difference. And he's like, because musicals are rituals. A ritual is something that gets a whole group of people on the same wavelength and with the same heartbeat, right? That music, that swell from the orchestra gives us all this elevated sense of being, of almost mystic. And you make a ritual to make the world you want to see. The wise women in the shtetls were often called Aussprecherin, which means to speak out. Now that meant speaking out as in making the demon go away, right? But I like to think of it as also like the people who speak out. So, what do we need to speak out of our culture? What rituals do we need to speak the world to come? I really want drag to be part of that, and I really want Yiddish culture to be part of that too. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Goldie. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. We got a real quick transition here. So we're going to be bringing in a couch and a couple of chairs. We're going to have about 5 minutes. So if you do need to run out real quick, do so. Just look out for the couch. And we'll see you in just a few minutes. The next panel is with the Drag Heels cast of season 4 and Disco Jesus.